Hello everybody and welcome back to the 12th episode of Tides of Lore. My name is Robert Silva. I am one half of your hosting, joined as always by my good friend Tim. How you doing today, Tim?
Really good, Rob. We're out here, 60 rating. Got the epic mount, dude. Cool questline, man. It actually costs a good amount of money too. It's not like it's free. It's probably like 600 to 800 gold. But it's a cool questline, man. The final quest, you have to go to Skolamance. Do you know Rattlegore, that boss?
Isn't he like the abomination looking dude?
He's the bone construct in the basement. You have to go like down underneath the room. And so you gotta clear that room out, and then waves of spirits come at you. And you have to use judgments, the correct judgment to stun these spirits. And it does like an AoE stun. So really cool fight, and then you fight a death knight at the end, which is pretty cool too. But yeah,
I've always said with Classic, I think that the like long form quests are what really make it feel super special. So being able to, even if it costs a lot of money, still having the opportunity to do stuff like that, like along with the attunements as well, feels very satisfying to complete.
You have to like make a spiritual barding for like, because you're literally summoning a horse as a paladin, which I didn't really know.
Yeah, when you told me that it can literally get interrupted, I'm like, fascinating.
Yeah, and it takes mana. It takes mana, so it interrupts your mana regen, which is unfortunate. But it also looks sick. It has this like yellow light like emanating from it, almost like glowing, which I don't think it has that past Classic. I don't remember that as a thing.
It's hard for me to remember just because so many mounts will then eventually have like effects and stuff.
But yeah, man, doing Alterac Valley. I'm revered, trying to get to Exalted. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes games suck and it's aggravating. Agonizing.
Welcome to Alterac Valley. Burn, 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 burn.
Yeah, but almost there. What about you, man? How you doing?
I've been doing pretty good. I have mostly been playing Ghost Recon with our buddy Jojo over this last week, as well as getting all of the social media accounts set up for Tides of Lore so we can post more of our short form videos from the podcast, like you guys might have seen on the YouTube shorts.
What did you make? Just real quick, plugging it. What did you make? TikTok?
Yeah, we now, I mean, basically if the social media exists, we're on there. We're on Blue Sky, we're on Instagram, the Threads, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook,
let's go.
Any of that shit. So if that is something that interests you guys, make sure to check it out and give us a follow so that you can keep up to date with when we're posting.
Yeah, man, you've been hard at work. I applaud you for all the work you put in, man. You go hard.
Outside of actually setting up the accounts, it is actually really satisfying, and I've been learning how to use Premiere Pro. I historically used Sony Vegas to edit my videos, so I've been learning how to use Adobe Premiere to make some better content. Hopefully you guys will see that evolve as we get further on in this journey of ours. But yeah, that's mostly what I've been up to. So the last episode, we discussed some of the events of the creation of the Forsaken, as well as some of the events that go on in the Eastern and Western Plaguelands, just the Plaguelands in general, with the undead, as well as some of the Paladin Order. What do you remember about that episode, Tim?
Well, not only that, yeah, we talked about the Forsaken and like Nathanos, but I remember us talking a bunch about the Ashbringer. Basically, its creation and its changes that it's had. A very important weapon that it's Paladins love it, right? It's literally their Legion artifact. And then we talked a little bit about the Scarlet Crusade. I remember Sally Whitemane's. We talked about her starting and eventually her bigger role and just kind of how it was a corrupt organization.
Yep. Some of the events of Naxxramas, Alexandros Morgraine being one of the 4 horsemen as he wields the corrupted Ashbringer, some of that stuff. That's what went on in our last episode. If you're interested in checking that out, please do. And in this episode, we're going to be moving into a pretty beefy conversation as well, as we talk about the origins of the Dwarves and Blackrock Mountain and the Molten Core. So it is going to be a fun time. I'm excited.
I love BRD, man. It is such a rich like history of it, and it's fun going there. It's a vibe.
I agree. Like I said in the end of the last episode, I think it's probably over the years my favorite location that we kind of constantly revisit and constantly has stories told within it, and seems to have just a very rich lore that tells an entire story even as you're just walking around the areas nearby it.
There's just so much going on. There's dragons, there's Twilight's Hammer cultists, there's experiments in there done by Deathwing, right?
Yeah. And we're mostly going to talk about that portion of the Blackrock Spire and stuff like that in the next episode when we get into the humans of Stormwind, as well as the plot lines with the Nixia and Nefarian and kind of the Black Dragonflight's plot to fuck up the world as they do. Before we do hop into this episode, I did want to throw in a new segment that we were planning to do, just because I do kind of want to highlight some of your guys' comments that you've been leaving on a lot of the videos that we've been making, and thank you for that as well. But back on the 10th episode of Tides of Lore, this episode is called Sacrifice, about Illidan and the Night Elf campaign during Warcraft 3, we have JC Chaos 00X saying, in response to us joking if druids were the laziest class in World of Warcraft, he says, druids often view themselves as the only line of defense for the Emerald Dream, which if damaged would affect the world in a way that regular classes just simply aren't prepared for, which I think does give a good kind of insight onto why druids are so frequently taking their cat naps.
I love the insight too. It's fun to just see what other people have to say about it.
Indeed. I did also joke with him. I'm like, yeah, that is a good point. However, what is also rather ironic is when you do think about it, the other thing that the druids most commonly do to the Emerald Dream is fuck it up. So, I mean, they cause the Emerald Nightmare, they cause the Worgen to get trapped in there due to them messing around with the Scythe of Elune and stuff like that. So, I mean, I can see it both ways. They trying to do good, but frequently they kind of backfires on them.
Here's Jerry. A-Res Jerry. Thanks, boys, with the flex.
Oh, yes. A-Res Jerry with the flex emoji. Thanks, boys. We do appreciate that as well.
Appreciate that.
And if you guys want to get a comment in one of these videos, make sure to drop one down there while you're watching, and maybe you'll get featured in the next episode.
We can't leave out the Away fan. He's there every single time.
Yeah.
What'd you talk about with him?
The Away fan asked if we have any more info on the Eye of Sargeras. How do you use it? Do we need to replace one of your own eyes to throw it in? How large is it? Do I carry it in a bag, or does it attach to a headband? Something I can wear on my forehead, ? What's the power level on it? And more importantly, why can't the co-host do the ad reads once in a while?
Well, okay. I do like the questions about the Eye of Sargeras, because I didn't even specifically know, because all these artifacts you talk about, like some have, stipulations, some are obvious, like the Lich King's armor, right? But the Eye of Sargeras, I didn't know. Is it a real eye? But you said it's not. You said it's a magical artifact, like a focus.
Yeah,
that's what you said, if I remember.
I responded to his comment. I was just like, we actually have very little info on the eye, and it's true. We basically have none of it. The only real info that we have is that it was probably the artifact that Gul'dan was trying to seek to empower himself during the Second War when he was betraying the Legion and the Horde. And outside of that, it was theorized to maybe be the eye of the actual avatar of Sargeras, but that kind of gets disproven because when we go into the Tomb of Sargeras, he still seems to have all the damage that Adrian laid out onto him, except he also still has both of his eyes, seemingly. Though it would be about the right size, because it is a pretty massive artifact, probably like half the size of a fucking human or something. So,
well, good to know. Good to know.
Yes, indeed. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Tides of Lore on YouTube, or if you're on Spotify, leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps the channel and ensures you won't miss a moment of this adventure. Now let's get started. So just to open up this episode, we are quite literally starting at the beginning of all time, or even rather before time itself, where in the universe there is simply an ever-expanding, boundless sea of light. The entire universe is just light, pure light. The same light that paladins and priests worship in the Warcraft game. But across this infinite sea would eventually begin to form these little pockets of chaos and unstructure and emptiness. And this would be the creation of the antithesis of the light, the void. And with the void coming into creation as well, these two entities basically would begin to kind of clash with each other, and it would eventually lead to these cataclysmic eruptions due to them constantly clashing, which in a burst of energy would give birth to the reality that we know of, the actual existence of the universe that we understand, the great dark beyond. And with that, these powerful entities would kind of fracture into each other. While it seems like the void takes over a larger portion of everything, the light would also be sent sprawling across pockets of this world where they would create the beings of pure light, the Naru, that the Draenei worship and stuff like that, the ones that were also kind of drained by the Blood Elves. And it would also, we don't really know too much about these guys still, but this is where the Void Lords, the rulers over the realm of the Void, seem to exist, which I'm sure we'll get to eventually in the story, but currently they're still kind of an enigma.
Next expansion, bro. What is it? Midnight? It's literally called Midnight, dude. I think it could be very cool.
I mean, yeah, like even in this most recent expansion, The War Within, we are dealing a lot with the light and the void and how they interact with each other and stuff like that. So as we get further down the storyline, you too will also see this story come to its fruition. But during this initial spark of creation, there are now planets, and these planets sometimes are barren, sometimes they are also kind of struck with the sparks of light that infuse the planets with essence of creation. And with that, they begin to form elemental life. And that is quite simply just how the elements come into being. The elemental spirits of fire, earth, water, air. And there's actually a fifth element known as spirit that is supposed to keep all of these other elements within balance of each other. And that leads to our planet of Azeroth, where we have the, like I just kind of explained, one of these planets that is infused with this elemental life. But the problem with Azeroth is that also within this planet is a world soul. And just to put it super simply, a world soul is what the Titans, kind of the gods of order, come from. And it is a really young child of that. And that's how Titans come to be. They are born of entire worlds that consume so much spirit, the elemental spirit, that they are birthed into Titans. So that's how the Pantheon, Sargeras, all these other Titans that we'll eventually get more detail in come to being.
And I think it can be influenced, right? And that's why everyone wants to find it and why it's so important.
So they seem to indicate that the Titans, once full grown, can't really be influenced. They can't really be corrupted. That doesn't seem to be true because Sargeras.
I mean, look at Sargeras.
Yeah. Well, and also the thing with Sargeras is that he doesn't necessarily think that he's doing wrong. He thinks that he is doing the right thing by basically purging the worlds of every planet to get rid of the void, when the Pantheon of the Titans instead goes for the option of trying to bring order to them and trying to fight with the old gods instead of just obliterating. But like I said, we'll get into more of their story. Right now, we're trying to focus kind of strictly on the elements and how that affects the world. So as Azeroth is this primordial world, it begins to fall out of balance because the world soul is consuming so much of this elemental spirit that the elements of fire, wind, water, and earth fall out of balance. So that is where the world of Azeroth begins to have these elements that kind of clash with each other. So you have super powerful forms of these elemental beings that come into existence that kind of rule over their lessers. And we're going to just go over them real quickly. The main one that we'll be talking about today is going to be Ragnaros, the Fire Lord. And he is the embodiment of destruction and rage. You also have Alakir, the Wind Lord, who rules over the storms. Therazane, the Stone Mother, who we briefly spoke about with the Tauren, who shapes the earth as well as the mountains and the cradles of the land. And then there is Neptulon, the Tide Hunter, the ruler of the seas that commands the waves.
That's cool. I think we've interacted with every single one of those at some point in time in game.
I mean, even Molten Core, you are working for the Hydraxian warlords, who are servants of Neptulon.
Well, even in, I think, Kata, like, you go...
Oh, yeah.
What's that underwater?
That whirlpool zone. I can't entirely remember its name, but...
Yeah.
The zone that everyone hated because swimming fucking...
You even see like what Therazane is like in Cataclysm and Deepholm, I think.
Mm-hmm. That is
Right?
where she rules over.
I don't know if you do you see her? I forget. I didn't play Cata.
I
when
think
it
that she kind of
re-released.
stays hidden because she is imprisoned in Deepholm until the events of the Cataclysm, where Deathwing comes shattering out of that realm. But we do also interact with Alakir, the Wind Lord, in his
Oh, yeah.
floating temple over top of.
He's a raid boss.
And he didn't drop my mount for like 200 fucking runs. I can't believe that.
It took me a while for him too, man. But luckily, it's just like he's right there. You know,
Yeah,
you have to do like
just
one little fight before
small ads and then crush him.
Yeah.
So, and just to give you guys an idea, like the world of Draenor, because it did not have a slumbering world spirit in it before the creation of the orcs or the Ogron or any of that stuff, the reason that world had such balance and unity with all of its elements was because the element of spirit was not being drained out of it. So that's why they were so easily able to connect with the elements of Draenor before the fell corruption kind of fucked up everything.
Did you say there was fire, earth, water, air, and spirit?
And
Like,
spirit.
so this is a fifth. I don't recall anything like that in the game. Is there a character or
So I don't know.
have we seen this before?
Is anything necessary? We have seen it because when Thrall is learning to become a shaman, he kind of has these trials for all of the elements. And the last one that he has to learn is how to commune with spirit, the one that binds them all together. And that's when he actually becomes a shaman who can control all of the elements by learning how to basically wield the spirit. And it is also kind of theorized that spirit could be what creates the realm of the Emerald Dream, because it is kind of what is like the blueprint for a world to naturally develop and naturally form life and stuff like that. So it's not confirmed that that is the case, but that does to me make a lot of sense, especially because when Ysera is made the dreamer, the one that watches over the Emerald Dream, she doesn't change the Emerald Dream. She's the watcher of it. She takes care of it. She doesn't necessarily control it. It's almost like an entity that's bigger than her.
But there's a fire lord, there's a wind lord. Is there a spirit lord?
It doesn't seem like it. There in Hearthstone, there are like life elementals or like something like that. They're like green, and they seem to be made of pure green energy. But in the actual game, I don't think we really encounter anything like that now.
Okay.
It's almost like the force that kind of binds them all together.
Gotcha.
So seeing this, the Void Lords now realize that these Titans are being born and that they are trying to bring order to the universe. And they hate that. That is the exact opposite of what they want for the universe. So they begin to craft beings that will serve them in the effort of corrupting these world souls before they are fully brought into fruition. And that's where they craft the Lovecraftian eldritch horrors known as the Old Gods. And with that, they just kind of shotgun blast them across every part of the cosmos, hoping that they will crash into one of these world souls. And when they do, I mean, usually they'll just land on a planet that doesn't, and the Old Gods will completely take over. And when they do, sometimes it seems like they also begin to corrupt some of these world souls. But we haven't seen too much about that, with the exception of one story where it seems like Sargeras might have encountered one that was already entirely corrupted, and he just kind of smashes the planet in half with his massive sword.
That's crazy. What he tried to do to us.
He thought about it. He thought about it.
He did.
So yeah, the Old Gods go sprawling across the Great Dark Beyond, and eventually they do crash into Azeroth. Specifically, there are the four that we know about being N'Zoth,
Yashiraj.
N'Zoth, Yashiraj, Yogg-Saron, and Cthulhu. And those are kind of the four that we really know about. This lore has constantly kind of changed, whether there's 5 of them or there's 4 of them or there's 3 of them, but that is the ones that we know a lot about and can really confirm come to the planet. So they crash into Azeroth, and they see these elemental lords, and all these elemental lords are warring with each other constantly, like we said, and they're just in this never-ending battle with each other that's been going on for millennia. And they're like, that's great and all, guys, I'm really happy for you, but this is our planet now, so you're going to need to stop. And they begin to craft an army that is basically born of their own flesh, and that is where you get the creatures known as the Naraki, who are more simply known to us as the Faceless Ones, kind of tentacle squid monsters. And then the Akir, who are the insectoid creatures that will eventually go on to be descended into the Nerubians, the Karaji, the Mantid, and kind of the bug-like creatures that serve the old gods.
The faceless ones are powerful, man.
Oh, yeah. They even have some super powerful generals known as the Cathraxi. There's also the one that you learn about during the events of Battle for Azeroth that breaks the seal of whatever the fuck in Zul'Dazar.
I don't remember that.
We'll talk more about them later, but for right now, the old gods and their minions go to war with the elemental lords and their minions. And while the elemental lords are super powerful, they are not as powerful as old gods, and they are defeated and enslaved. And with this, they are bent to the will of the old gods, which will form the era of Azeroth known as the Black Empire. And with that, the entire world of Azeroth, is still for the most part single landmass of Kalimdor, is now ruled over by different sections of these old gods who are looking to corrupt the world soul within Azeroth. And that's when the Pantheon pulls up. The Pantheon of the Titans, the world souls that have already flourished into adulthood, finds Azeroth, and they realize, they're like, not only is there a world soul on this planet, but it is seeming to be the most powerful world soul that we've ever encountered. It is theorized by them that if it were to be able to be brought into adulthood, that it would be able to single-handedly defeat all of the Void Lords.
Wow.
So they're like, we need to make sure that we protect this one and let it grow into its full potential. So, realizing that there are already old gods that have crashed into this planet, they begin to craft their own little army to try and take them on. And that's when they create minions that they will call the Titan Forged. There are two different forms of these. The Aesir, which are kind of these metallic beings forged of pure storms that command the skies and thunder, as well as the Vanir, massive stone creatures that form from the bedrock of the world and wield the power of the earth itself. And these Titan Forged would kind of be led by certain keepers. Some of them we've already discussed, like Tyr, and their purpose is to shatter the Black Empire.
Pretty badass. Quick question. The Acer and the Vanir, are they Vrykul looking, or what do they look like?
It has kind of changed, because in the WoW RPG, it seemed to kind of indicate that they were like the Storm Giants and the Earth Giants. But it's kind of changed, because, I mean, like, we also know the Keepers, and they seem to just kind of be, I don't know, like, just metal beings. But there's also, like, Loken, who I would imagine is a Storm Giant who controls the lightning in the skies from the Storm Peaks.
I was going to say, I'm thinking Sons of Hodir right now. Is that what we're talking about looking like?
Yeah, I think that's
you remember in Wrath?
I think they are technically descendants of these actual creatures, but yes, those are kind of who we would recognize to be, at the very least, the creations of these beings. And they're all kind of referenced as, they're all kind of references to the actual Norse mythological gods, so like Odin and Freya and stuff like that. And we'll get more into that as we kind of close in on Legion, because Odin has a huge story that we'll talk about and be able to dive more into this. But they arrive. They are first kind of faced with the elemental lords who have been enslaved and the minions of the old gods. And with this, they clash with them. Their Titan Forged clash with them. And that is where you will get the elemental lords being defeated, and they'll be banished into essentially a pocket dimension by the Titans and the Titan Keepers into what we know as the elemental plane. And that's where they'll just kind of be imprisoned for a very long time, at least until the events of World of Warcraft. But that is where now the only goal that they have left is to take on the actual old gods themselves. So the Titans themselves kind of realize that it is unlikely that their keepers will be able to defeat the old gods. So the leader of the Titan Pantheon, a man by the name of Aman'Thul, will decide, you know what? I'm going to just handle it myself. Fine. I'll do it myself, basically. And he sees the kind of the most powerful of these old gods at the time, Yasharaj, kind of in the dead center of Kalimdor. And he's like, come on out of there. And he reaches down from the heavens, ripping this old god from the planet and just obliterating him as parts of its essence will come crashing back down to Azeroth. And it will kill Yasharaj. He will be actually killed. But they then realize that the problem is that by ripping these old gods out, they'd already kind of set their roots into the world soul so much that it leaves a massive gash in Azeroth's crust that is just bleeding out this arcane lifeblood. And they realize that if they are to continue to just rip these old gods out and destroy them, that it's likely they will just destroy the entire planet of Azeroth.
Yeah, you can't just rip it out when it's embedded in the crust and the core. So what do they kill old gods? But when you kill an old god, does it come back?
So, I mean, what we get from this story is that we can't, like, truly kill old gods, but then, you know, we get Battle for Azeroth, we get stuff like that, and it seems like we've actually killed them, so I don't know the full implications of how all of that works, but what I do know is that the Titans, with this understanding, they decide, well, we'll just imprison them. We'll create these massive structures to keep them imprisoned, and that way we'll be able to seal off the corruption while the world soul comes into being. So that is their next course of action. And with their keepers, with Tyr and stuff like that, they begin to construct these massive underground prisons, these tombs of impenetrable stone and magic for the remaining old gods of Yogg-Saron, Cthulhu, and N'Zoth. And with enough time, they do actually manage to imprison all of these old gods in their prisons, and then they begin to turn their attention towards ordering Azeroth. That's what this event is called, the Ordering of Azeroth, where they begin to try and flourish the life and bring balance and stability to the planet itself. So the first course of action for them is that massive wound that Yasharaj left as it bled out. And that font of magic arcane power that is just pooling within the center of Kalimdor begins to get fortified with these magical seals by the Titans and their keepers, and eventually they do manage to take this volatile arcane power and turn it into something a bit more stable. And that's actually how you get the Well of Eternity. But it also, through this now being a more balanced arcane font of power that kind of draws from the cosmos itself, will also begin to flourish life across the planet. And the first one that we really know about is that it will kind of bring the sentient form of the trolls into existence, who will be kind of the first ones to exist on Azeroth as a mortal race, and they'll spread pretty rapidly across all of Kalimdor.
So they just like formed out of magic, or like was there a more primitive troll that turned into like the trolls we know today?
It seems like they were just kind of created by the power of the Well of Eternity itself, but also the Titan Keepers, specifically Freya, will begin to work on these massive forges to bring life to Azeroth and just kind of create life. The halls of origination and stuff like that will be brought into existence, and that is what their purpose is to help create life. That's where you get the Sholazar Basin, Ungoro Crater, stuff like that.
Wow.
Through these massive forges, the Titan Keepers will begin to create their own little beings and more Titan Forged to help to take care of these now growing facilities that they have all across Azeroth. And some of these forges are Ulduar, Uldum, and Uldaman. And we'll talk about all of these. Mainly the ones we're going to be discussing today are some of Ulduar, but mainly Uldaman. And their creations are going to be the beings that we would know as the Earthen, the Mecha Gnomes, and the Vrykul. So seeing the Titan Keepers doing good work and seeing that the old gods have been imprisoned, the Pantheon is like, all right, you guys can take it from here. We're going to go hit the cosmos, see if we can find some more world souls to help out. Good luck.
Oh, if they just pieced out, even though this is the most important.
You know, that's a really good point. But yeah, I guess they're just like, there are more worlds that need us. So they continue to head out, and they leave Azeroth in the hands of the Titan Keepers, like Tyr. And with that, the old gods begin to make their own play. This is where we have specifically the old god Yogg-Saron, who is imprisoned in the realm of Northrend, who his prison's really good, but it's not quite perfect. And he figures out that if he can leak his blood into the world itself, that it has this whispering, corrupting property to it as well. And it's called Serenite. It's this black stone that kind of poisons the area of Northrend. And it will, like I said, pretty much corrupt anything that it comes into contact with.
Even a mining node for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we mine in Wrath of the Lich King. So, like, we make Serenite armor. Are we corrupted?
Nah, we build different.
Because we literally put it on ourselves.
yeah.
Serenite armor.
I don't know. We do that, and I guess it might be refined to a point where it doesn't have as corrupting properties. It is said to be a super, super hard stone. It's actually what the Ice-Crown Citadel and the Wrathgate are made out of. So with that, his blood, Serenite, comes into contact with one of the Titan Keepers by the name of Loken, who will begin to lose his mind due to it, begin to fall into the corruption of the old gods. Also, he manages to seep his blood into one of these forges of creation, and he's going to infect it with what we will know as the Curse of Flesh, basically turning the Titan Keeper's constructs and the Titan Forged into fleshy beings. Their minds of mechanical make and their bodies of stone and metal will eventually begin to slowly over time change into soft, squishy flesh and blood.
Is it a curse though? Because I think you get free will once you're fleshy, right?
It's actually mentioned in the Chronicle. It's not something that the old gods necessarily expect, that it also imbues them with kind of the elements that we know to be kind of what the races of Azeroth embody, like courage and willpower and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily something they intended for us to get through this curse, but it is an effect of it.
Because beforehand, before the curse, when they're like stone, aren't they pretty much just like drones? Like they just do whatever the keepers want, and they lose that when they get fleshy.
But with Loken falling to this corruption, he kind of locks down the forge that he's watching over in Northrend called Ulduar. And he actually exiles a bunch of these Curse of Flesh infected creatures out of Ulduar, kind of on the behest of the old gods. And when Tyr finds out about this, he kind of just sees the Earthen and the Mechanomes and the Vrykul as victims of the old gods' corruption. So he decides, like, he sees them as basically innocent, so he decides to help them. And he, with him and some of the other Titan Keepers, begins to kind of go on this mass exodus across Kalimdor. And that is where they will travel south for a long time for a few weeks, before eventually reaching a land where they come into contact with one of those Kithraxi, like I mentioned, one of these super powerful faceless generals of the old gods who did not get imprisoned. And Tyr, being like the most heroic of all the Titan Keepers and our absolute dad, will make a sacrifice to protect the remaining Titan Forge so that they can escape. So he battles with this Kithraxi, and while he does manage to kill it, it also does slay him. And he will die. And the area where he falls and dies will actually become known as Tyr's Fall, or Tyrstfall, as we know in modern World of Warcraft.
The Tyrstfall Glades?
Tyrstfall Glades.
Where Lordaeron is?
Where Lordaeron is. And the Vrykul, who would witness this conflict and see his sacrifice, would be so moved by it that they would decide to build a massive tomb for the Keeper. And like I said, they kind of already know that they're infected with the cursed flesh and that they will eventually become fleshy beings. But regardless, they decide to look out for this facility. And that is where they will hang out for a while. I mean, for like many thousands of years before some of the other events that we'll talk about. And we'll get there.
How big is Tyr? I've always questioned this. He seems bigger than what I've seen in Dragonflight. Am I wrong? Because didn't his hand fall off?
Yeah, so there's like that massive hand that is his tomb. and that is like actual Tears Fall. But I mean, I would say that he is like twice, maybe 3 or 4 times the size of the dragons, because like we also mentioned back in the aspect video, he fights with Galakrond and he puts it in a headlock, but this Galakrond is even bigger than he is. So I mean,
like in Dragonflight, when we saw him, he was like 4 times bigger than us. Like, that's not that big. Like, it's big, don't get me wrong, but it's not as big enough to put a dragon in a headlock.
yeah, and size has always been kind of weird in this, because I mean, like, even the Titans themselves are implied to be like walking worlds themselves. So even Sargeras seems a little bit small for what we should be expecting. But yeah, and also during that time period in Dragonflight, he was resurrected, so for all we know, we could have put him into a smaller body or some shit like that, right? Thank you for tuning into Tides of Lore. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your fellow adventurers. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you. But the remaining Titan Forged, the Earthen, and the Mechanomes continue their journey away from Tears Fall, where they will eventually reach the Titan facility of Uldaman. And as they arrive, they do realize that the curse of flesh is really beginning to kind of take over them. So a bunch of these Earthen will decide that they should go into stasis, into these hibernation chambers, while the Titan Keepers and stuff like that seek a way to cure the curse of flesh. And a few of them will remain out of it. Some of the Earthen will remain out of it, and all of the Mechanomes will remain out. They kind of heroically offer to watch over the facility and make sure that it stays functional for the Earthen until they can figure out how to solve this, even though they also know that they will eventually be overcome by the curse of flesh. I should also mention that not all of the Earthen went to Uldaman. They kind of spread across Kalimdor, but some of them did kind of remain on the surface, but mostly they burrow into mountains and stuff. But when the events of the War of the Ancients comes around, they had already encountered the Night Elves. And they had actually kind of come into conflict with the Night Elves, and the Night Elves, using the Well of Eternity, were actually able to kind of overpower them. And that is actually where they would call these short creatures the derogatory slur of dwarves. So that is where dwarfs get their name of origin.
Is it derogatory in the fantasy sense?
Not like in D&D, and even as we move later into World of Warcraft, they don't understand it as a slur to them, basically. But yeah, that is where it originates. That's where they kind of get their identity of dwarves from. I imagine that the first time a night elf ever saw an actual dwarf, they were like, "Oh, you're a dwarf." So they're like, "I'm a dwarf."
Right.
And unfortunately, the War of the Ancients happens. Some of these Earthen do help to fight the Legion off. They join up with the Tauren and the Night Elves, and despite their kind of conflict, they see this invading demon threat as a worse problem, so they join up with them and they help them to fight the Legion. And the Legion will eventually be defeated. The Well of Eternity will implode, and the Sundering will be in, where it cracks the entire continent of Kalimdor and the entire face of Azeroth, really, into many more pieces. And unfortunately, the Earthen, being so connected to the planet itself and the actual Earth, when the Earth shatters, when Azeroth shatters and its landmass breaks apart, they feel it. They feel it as if their own flesh is being rendered and torn apart. So a bunch more of these Earthen will decide to then go and put themselves into stasis as well to avoid this agony. And that leaves only the Mechanomes watching over the Titan halls, basically. And specifically the ones within Uldaman will do what they can to watch over and make sure that the facility stays functional while the keepers look for cure to the curse of flesh. And eventually they will succumb to the curse of flesh, their mechanical bodies and analytical minds becoming, like I said, flesh and blood, brains, and human matter that we recognize as the gnomes. And this is how the gnomes are born.
Is this like an instantaneous thing? Is it something where like generationally, like they have a kid and then that kid just has flesh while they don't?
They don't even have kids at this point. The Titan Forge are literally created in forges. So yeah, it's just something that happens to their bodies over millennia or longer.
Okay.
And once the Curse of Flesh takes over most of the mecha gnomes, they lose their purpose, basically. They forget why they were even in this Titan facility. So, with their mental clarity kind of lost, they decide to leave Uldaman, and they go to spread across the continent of what we would know as the Eastern Kingdoms, and eventually we'll check back into them. But that leaves a very, very few amount of the mechanomes watching out for the remaining dwarfs in stasis in Uldaman. And as the very last mechanome begins to fall to the Curse of Flesh, it's said that with her dying breath, which, I mean, it doesn't seem like accurate because you don't actually die, you just kind of become, fleshy. But as they are succumbing to this curse, this mechanome opens the stasis chambers and unlocks the hibernation and frees the dwarfs before also losing her way and leaving Uldaman. And to be honest, I don't know what the purpose necessarily was for the hibernation chambers, because as the earthen wake up from their sleep, this is about 2,500 years before the dark portal opens, they come into consciousness, and they are also smooth-skinned and fleshy. And them having no real identity of who they even are, necessarily how they came into existence and stuff like that, they also leave Uldaman, and they leave this Titan facility. And as they come out of Uldaman, they look to the north, and they see massive mountains. And feeling their connection to the earth that is kind of just embedded into their very essence, they're like, seems like a good spot. I think we'll go there. So these, what we're just going to now refer to as dwarfs, begin to make their way towards this mountain range, and they reach the snow-capped peaks of Dun Morogh, where they will begin to form their own little kingdom of Khaz Modan, carving out the city of Ironforge in the heart of the tallest mountain in the mountain range.
The starting area.
Yep, the starting area for dwarves and gnomes. And actually, the gnomes are there too. They were also drawn to Khaz Modan because they are, like I said, drawn to the mountains and the earth the very same way that the dwarves are. But instead of being these masters of metallurgy and crafting and weapons like the earthen were, they were kind of the analytical minds. They come from a Titan keeper called Mimron, and he's kind of this master clockwork technician, basically. He creates ingenious inventions, and the gnomes retain a lot of this intelligence and retain a lot of this ingenuity. So they, in the mountains of Dun Morogh, will come into contact with the dwarves once again, and they can't necessarily explain it, but pretty much immediately they're like, we have a connection with you guys, and we really like you guys because, I mean, you just seem to understand things in a very similar way that we do. So the two forces will combine, and they will begin to form the gnomes' ingenious city of Gnomeregan.
Is this right next to Ironforge?
Yep.
Or is this... It is.
Built into a mountain as well.
Because I swear Gnomeregan is in BFA off of some islands, right?
You're thinking of Mechagon.
Oh, I am.
Mm-hmm. So there are
Gnomeregan. Yeah, the dungeon Gnomeregan. Yeah, I remember.
Where you got your thwacking maze.
Yeah.
So the dwarfs will then also come into contact with the race that descended from the Vrykul, who stayed near the tomb of Tyr, and they have also been overcome with the Curse of Flesh. But since they've been out for so much longer, they've had time to form these vast kingdoms, and they've spread all across the Eastern Kingdoms, and they are the race known as humans. And they aren't necessarily as connected with the Vrykul, because I'm pretty sure the Vrykul kind of come from the storm aspect instead of the earth aspect. But regardless, they do kind of begin to form a bond of kinship with them as well, where they form trade and they begin to work with this empire of Erethdor.
If humans came from Vrykul and gnomes came from mechanomes and dwarves came from earthen, both earthen and mechanomes look like what they turn into, but Vrykul are way bigger.
Yeah, and I think earthen used to be way bigger, but I don't... Actually, no, they wouldn't have been because they got called dwarfs, so I guess it...
And we also see the earthen in the War Within. They're the same size.
I do agree.
Like, they're way bigger.
And even, it kind of seems like they didn't necessarily know what they wanted to do with the human origin, because during the War of the Ancients trilogy book, they the night elves theorized that the humans descended from dwarves, that they kind of came from, they were just kind of a modified version of the dwarves that were eventually made taller. But like we said, as we know, eventually they were the descendants of the Vrykul. So it might have just been some fuckery going on with the actual lore writing.
Seems like it.
Yeah. But they encounter the humans. They encounter the high elves, and they kind of live isolated in their mountain range and form trade that leads to this basically life of prosperity. They're these master forgers and master craftsmen, and having all these gems and stuff like that, they build these super long-lasting trade networks with them. And eventually they'll join the Alliance of Lordaeron, like we mentioned, closer to the opening of the Dark Portal, but that is not what we're focusing on today. What we're focusing on today is 230 years before the Dark Portal opens. There are 3 major clans that kind of have the most power within Ironforge. And the main clan that watches over the military and kind of these masters of warfare are the Bronzebeards. And then there's these hardy mountaineers who are kind of explorers in a way. The Wildhammer, who prefer kind of being outside of the forge itself and being on the mountain peaks. And there are also these powerful sorcerers that dwell deep within the actual mountains themselves. And these are the Dark Irons.
Sorcerers?
Sorcerers.
Weird. The only magic user dwarves are paladins and priests, in Classic at least.
Well, that's because the only dwarfs that we play as in Classic are either, I mean, I feel like we would technically be Bronzebeards because, or at least descendants of them, because they are the ones that we actually start as in like Ironforge and stuff like that, right? And by the time that we get to where the Wildhammers are at, they're not really in Ironforge or nearby. So,
right.
We'll talk about it. But also, it is good that you mentioned that because the humans, when they did come into contact with the dwarves, they did actually teach them about the Church of the Light, and that is where some of the dwarfs would pick up this religion to follow the light, and that is why dwarfs can also be priests. And unfortunately, this many year piece, this 2,000 years of prosperity will kind of come to a screeching halt because the king of Ironforge, High King Anvilmar, will die. And after he dies, all 3 of these clans will begin to vie for the throne. And before Anvilmar's heir, his son, can take over, they start a massive civil war that will be known as the War of the Three Hammers between all 3 of these clans. And it just rages on from inside Ironforge. So all of these clans are pouring everything that they have, mobilizing all of their resources and warriors and abilities to fight with the other dwarves. And it will last for a while, like years, but eventually the Bronzebeards, being the kind of military strategists already and having so many more numbers seemingly than the rest of the other clans, they will actually defeat both the Wildhammer and the Dark Irons. And it is stated that the Wildhammers choose to leave Ironforge and the mountains of Dunmoreau to go form their own kingdom further to the north in the wetlands, as well as some of the highland areas. And they'll build their own kingdom and city of Grim Batol.
Those made by them? Interesting.
Yep. And the Dark Irons are kicked out. They're exiled. Because, I don't know specifically why, but they're like, fuck the Dark Irons.
So that's why the Wildhammer are friendly with us in one of the Highlands, like you said. But the Dark Iron are not, because they were exiled.
Yes, and we'll also talk about it a bit more, because as the Dark Irons head further south into what we know as the Red Ridge Mountains, they will begin to establish their own city and kingdom that they just named Thaurissan, after their leader. And they, unlike the Wildhammers, who would just kind of accept that they lost and that they weren't going to continue to fight with the other dwarves, they're like, we're going to get back at them. So they begin to plot and they begin to craft siege machines and work tirelessly for the next few years to try and reclaim Ironforge, as well as Grim Batol now too. So the Dark Irons build their forces up, and they delve deeper into the dark sorcery that they were already kind of fond of using. And with this newfound army and all their war machines, they launched this massive war on the remaining dwarf kingdoms. So Thaurissan would lead his army against the Bronzebeards, and they would march on Ironforge. And his wife, Modgud, a powerful sorceress, would take their second army and head to Grimbatol to crush the Wildhammers.
What a name. Modgud?
Modgud. M-O-D-G-U-D.
Good. They don't, why did they stop naming kids that?
Hey, man, there's always time, right? So Thaurissan clashes with the Bronzebeards at Ironforge. And while the Bronzebeards fight fiercely against the sorcery and the siege weapons that they now have, they do lose a lot of ground. But they make them, like, they're like, you're going to have to take every single step in this city with blood and steel. And they do. They push them all the way to basically the heart of Ironforge before the Bronzebeards are able to stop them. And after they are halted in the heart of the city, the Bronzebeards are kind of reinvigorated, and they begin to push the Dark Irons back out, and they manage to defeat this one half of the Dark Iron army. And once again, the Dark Irons are forced to retreat, humiliated once again. Over in the wetlands and Grimbatol, you have Modgud, who, like I said, she's a super powerful sorceress, and she, using the unnatural shadow magics that she controls, would begin to turn Grimbatol into a nightmare realm, where basically the shadows of the very city itself stalk and slay the defenders of it. So while the Wildhammers are fighting bravely against them, they are living in a prison of nightmares, basically. And
all made by Modgud.
All made by Modgud.
She's that powerful? Holy crap.
Apparently these Dark Irons were something crazy, because Thaurissan's also going to do something pretty wild here in a second, too.
Okay.
But kind of with their back against the wall, but, dwarves, they're stubborn. That's kind of one of the major attributes of being born of stone and being born of earth, is that you're stubborn, you're resilient. So they rally in this kind of last-ditch counterattack where they rush Modgud, and the leader of the Wildhammers actually manages to kill her. And with that, the Wildhammers are renewed, and the Dark Irons are kind of forced to retreat as well. But as the Dark Irons are beginning to retreat back towards the Redridge Mountains, the Bronzebeards hear about it, and they decide, they see this as a great opportunity, so they send their armies out of Ironforge to go meet with the Dark Irons as well. And that leaves the remaining army, basically, of the Dark Irons pincered between the Wildhammer and the Bronzebeards, and they are just annihilated. So with that being the case, the Bronzebeard and the Wildhammers now kind of once again reach a agreement to unite against this threat. And they vow to put an end to Thaurissan's tyranny. So they begin to march for the Redridge Mountains to go basically collect the head of Thaurissan. And Thaurissan, now super pissed off that he's just lost all these battles and that his wife is dead, would begin to cast a super powerful spell to call upon the elements themselves. And as he's doing this, he begins to just be filled with rage and grief, and his magic gets twisted, and he kind of, I guess, overdoes it in a way, where as he is trying to call upon these elements and summon them into the world, he gets way more than he asked for, as he pulls the Fire Lord Ragnaros himself from the elemental plane back into Azeroth. And
wow.
Yeah. And as Ragnaros comes bursting into the realm of Azeroth, the Redridge Mountains shatter. The land begins to sunder, and it is just engulfed with firestorms as it splits apart and the skies darken. And the King Thaurissan is immediately incinerated. And
nice.
And the Bronzebeards and the Wildhammer, who were making their way over there, see this, and they're like, actually, never mind. And they U-turn right back where they were going. They're like, he's doomed himself. We'll leave them to their fuckery. They've already been, stomped out basically by their own doing.
There's no way. He actually killed himself?
Yeah. As he summons Ragnaros into the world, basically incinerates him.
I swear I thought he was like the last boss in PRD.
Oh, we're going to talk about him.
Oh. Ooh.
So as they're leaving and they're just horrified by what they see the mountain that their city was in, the city of Tharson itself, basically explode. And this mountain turns from just a regular mountain into what we know as the Blackrock Mountain, an active volcano that is just seemingly never ending, pushing out fire and lava and scorching the areas around it, turning them from kind of what we know as the peaceful areas of the Red Ridge Mountains into the Searing Gorge and the Burning Steppes. With that being all handled, the Bronzebeards offer the Wildhammers an opportunity to come back to Ironforge. And they're like, look, we, had our problems before, but if you want, you can come rejoin us in Ironforge and we will, we can work together again. Dwarves are stubborn and they're prideful. So they're like, no, we're all right. Thanks for the offer, but we're going to go do our own thing. And the Wildhammers head back to their capital city of Grimbatol, but they do find that the twisted sorcery mod good had put on permanently corrupted the city, and it is forever cursed to be twisted by this dark sorcery. And that is where they decide, all right, we're gonna go find a new home, and they make their way into a zone known as the Hinterlands, this kind of mountainous, hilly region to the further northeast of the wetlands. And they're going to found a new city that they will eventually, and it's actually not inside of a mountain this time, it's on top of it, called the Airy Peak. And here,
it's not that big.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's also, we have to understand this is only 200 years ago. So while the dwarves had 2,500 years, or while the Bronzebeards had 2,500 years to build Ironforge and stuff like that, they managed to do an impressive amount in such a small time before World of Warcraft, right? But they also begin to practice shamanism and trying to connect with the earth itself and the elements. And through this, they begin to create a bond with the wildlife around the Airy Peak, specifically the griffins. And this is where they will begin to form this lifelong bond with these creatures and kind of build their identity around it. And that is why when you see Wildhammers in World of Warcraft, as well as Warcraft 3 and stuff, they ride griffins and they have these lightning hammers and stuff like that.
Storm Riders, I think.
So despite the fact that they're still divided, these two clans, the Bronzebeards and the Wildhammers, vow with each other to never fight a war with each other again. And to ease trade and travel between the two kingdoms, they build the Thandle Span, these two massive bridges that connect their lands. And through this, despite their rivalries, and that's even why when you go to Ironforge and you fly out of their flight master, he'll say something like, yeah, those Airy Peak griffins are fast, but can they handle the heat of the mighty forge? So they still have this rivalry amongst each other, but they are regardless friends in a way.
Gotcha. That's funny. Yeah, he does say that.
Back at the Blackrock Mountain, Ragnaros, now watching over the molten core, begins calling in all of his other elementals, as well as do you remember what the snake people are called? Major Domo executives?
Oh, I guess they're not Naga. I don't know.
The Flame Walkers. And they look very much like the Naga because, I mean, saving time on making entirely new models is how you make a game, right? So
right. But they are different. They're not highborn that been turned into something else?
No, they come from the elemental plane and they are servants of Ragnaros. Also, the remaining dark irons that are within the mountain are now enslaved by the elemental lord and his minions. And he basically forces them to carve out a new city within the mountain called Shadowforge City as a kind of defense and fortress for their new master.
Pre being woken up, was Ragnaros asleep?
He was in the Firelands, raging war still against all of the other.
And that's a different plane of existence, right? Wow.
Yep. So that's where we now come to the story of Dagran Tharson, the son. Well, I guess more direct descendant. Dwarves live for a really long time, so I don't think he's his actual son. I think he's maybe a few generations removed. But this is where we come into him ruling over the Dark Iron as their emperor. And eventually, Ragnaros is all right, guys, it's time. Just to be clear, this is basically where we move into the events of classic World of Warcraft. And he says, all right, guys, it's time to go to war. I'm looking to burn down the whole world. So, chop, chop, we got work to do. And with that being the case, Dagran would kidnap the daughter of the current ruler of the Bronzebeards, King Magni, and kidnap his daughter, Moira, intending to use her as a political hostage. But as she is imprisoned with him, she actually doesn't form hatred for him. She begins to kind of found an understanding with him of a man who wants freedom for his people just as much as she had kind of wanted to be independent from her father's rule. So in this captivity, she kind of Stockholm syndromes herself into love with Dagran. And soon enough, Moira becomes pregnant with the child of Dagran. And now this child would essentially be the heir to both the Dark Irons and the Bronzebeards.
You can, in BRD, you choose to either kill her, right, or save the princess run. And I think there's a quest attributed to saving the princess. Or if you kill her, I think you get some loot. Oh, yeah, that's what happened. He gets mad as hell.
Mad as hell, starts crushing your fucking tank.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's actually exactly what happens next. King Magni reaches out to the heroes of Azeroth. And he tells them, like, my daughter's been kidnapped. She's being kept in Shadowforge City in the Blackrock depths. And you need to go get her because she's my family. She's my kid. And he doesn't understand that she doesn't want to necessarily leave at this point. So us, the heroes of Azeroth, we charge into the Blackrock depths. We kill everything in there on the way. And then eventually we reach the throne room of Dagran Thorson, where Moira sits next to him. And like you said, there's 2 technical opportunities in the gameplay to handle the situation where you kill her as well. But the canon one is that you just kill Thorson and you try and tell Moira, your dad wants you back home. And she kind of just spits in your face and is like, I don't want to come home. And
doesn't she become leader of them? I'm pretty sure in retail, she is the leader of them.
So we'll reach more into it because they have a story during Cataclysm once Magni does his champion stuff.
Oh gosh, I hear that in my nightmares.
So we'll get there. But for right now, she still rules over the Dark Iron now. Queen of the Dark Irons with her unborn child and looking for ways to free her people from the enslavement of Ragnaros, which is where she will kind of spread the word across Azeroth that the Dark Irons are slaves to the Fire Lord. And this draws the attention of somebody who hates the Fire Lord. It catches the attention of one Neptulon the Tide Hunter, who is kind of the natural enemy of Ragnaros.
Elementals hate each other?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It seems like the old gods work together, kind of. I mean, they have their schemes and their overall plans that might contradict. But for the most part, old gods work together. Elementals don't?
Not really, because like we mentioned at the start of the episode, the spirit of Azeroth that keeps them all in balance with each other and harmony is being drained by the actual planet itself. So they always have beef with each other, basically. And if the old gods never showed up, they probably would have never stopped fighting with each other.
Huh.
Even in the elemental plane, they still fight with each other.
Seems counterproductive.
No one ever said the elementals were logical. But yeah, so Neptulon will send his Hydraxian warlords to assist the champions of Azeroth with handling this invading, or this now freed Ragnaros. And that is where they will direct you to storm the Molten Core, the very first raid of World of Warcraft, where 40 of the best heroes in all of Azeroth will go.
I did it last night.
Yes, sir. Did you get any drops?
Yeah. No.
Yep, sounds about right.
Yeah.
But they slay Ragnaros' lieutenants, Baron Geddon and Major Domos Executus, who will, in his dying call, summon Ragnaros into the mountain, or basically call Ragnaros into the Molten Core, where you and the heroes of Azeroth will face him and eventually defeat him, banishing him back to the elemental plane. And yeah, that is where we will once again kind of re-encounter him. Like I said, Ragnaros just gets sent back to the Firelands. He's not dead, so he is still kind of defeated and fuming over there, where he plots his next moves leading to some of the events of Cataclysm and stuff like that.
Can you actually kill an elemental? Because, I mean, spoilers, but in Cataclysm, there's a Firelands raid. So do you actually, or do you have to like kill him in the elemental plane to do it?
You do actually kill him, and he is eventually replaced by another ruler by the name of Smoldarion, who is also an elemental fire lord. But yeah, that is where you will...
You fight him in Dragonflight. Smolderon.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, so he does actually die.
Dodge.
And that is where our story ends for today. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure that you leave a comment about your favorite portion of Blackrock Mountain or the Dwarves if you're a real rock and stone enjoyer. But we will see you guys next episode for, like I said, some of the Humans of Stormwind, Varian Wren, maybe some Defias Brotherhood stuff, as well as the plotting of Onyxia, Nefarian, and Deathwing. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. Your guys' support truly means the world to us. If you're interested in hearing more, we have our full show on YouTube and Spotify, new episodes dropping every Tuesday. I also want to take this moment to give a special thank you to Fantasy Lo-Fi for providing the music for this episode. You can find them on YouTube at Fantasy Lo-Fi or on Spotify under Bits and Hits. Be sure to show them some love as their music does truly bring this journey to life. Once again, thank you for joining us on Tides of Lore, and we will see you next week.